On that unforgettable day, the moment I had meticulously planned for months finally arrived. My husband's 75th birthday. I wanted it to be a grand affair, a celebration of his life, our shared journey, and the respect he commanded among friends and family. Everyone was there. Our children, our closest friends, neighbors, even his colleagues. His favorite jazz quartet filled the air with melodies, and the backyard was adorned with lights and flowers he loved so much. Just as I was about to announce his surprise, I caught sight of her. That nurse, half his age, was hovering close to him, hands lingering on his arm, her smile far too intimate for what should have been a professional relationship. The pieces fell into place with a cruel swiftness, their secret suddenly as clear as glass. For years, I had brushed aside suspicions, rationalizing late-night shifts, dismissing text messages with vague explanations. But here, in front of everyone who mattered to us, was the final insult. My husband, parading his betrayal, bold enough to bring her to his own celebration. I steadied myself, walking through the crowd until I stood behind him. "Honey," I called, my voice loud enough to quiet the murmurs. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, and his face blanched as he turned to see me standing with her. I gave them both a smile, watching the horror bloom in his eyes as he realized the game was up. "Shall we make a toast?" I asked, lifting a glass, and with a cutting smile, I raised my voice. "To years of love and fidelity." The silence that followed my toast was thick, electric. I could see the confusion flicker across the guests' faces, their curiosity barely masked by nervous laughter. My husband stammered, searching for words, as if there were anything he could say to redeem himself in this moment. And then, unable to help myself, I directed my gaze at her, this young, blushing woman who had played such an unexpected role in our lives. "Oh, don't be shy," I said, keeping my tone light, inviting. "You've gotten so close to him in recent months. Why don't you tell everyone here how you two met?" She opened her mouth but couldn't speak, her face flushing deep red. My husband's hand clutched the stem of his wine glass, his knuckles white, as he struggled to maintain composure. I watched his face, that stoic, controlled mask slipping into something raw, uncertain. I kept my voice steady, barely above a whisper, but loud enough for those around us to hear. "How many afternoons did you spend working late? How many phone calls from your study sessions did I smile through trusting you, even when the evidence was right in front of me?" I looked at him, every bit the devoted wife he had always shown off to the world. "I loved you enough to believe your lies." And with that, I turned to the crowd, who were now openly gawking. Friends exchanged glances, embarrassed, unsure of where to look, while our children watched with eyes wide, shocked by the realization that the idyllic marriage they'd idolized was not so perfect after all. A slight tremor worked its way through my body, but I held steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, looking over the crowd, "it seems I've given him the wrong kind of surprise tonight. But let's be real. Perhaps it's exactly the kind he deserves." With that, I raised my glass once more and took a long, unhurried sip, savoring the taste of truth, however bitter. The crowd stood frozen, uncertain whether to flee or stay and watch the unfolding drama. I could feel their pity, curiosity, and embarrassment blending into a thick haze that hung over the entire gathering. My husband had turned ashen, his hand still gripping his wine glass as if it were his last lifeline. The nurse, Alyssa, as I now remembered her name from his whispered phone calls, began to stammer an apology. I never meant to. This was all a mistake." I cut her off with a raised hand, Oh, please, save your apologies for someone who might believe them. I couldn't hold back a slight bitter laugh. Or did he feed you the same sweet nothings he used to give me years ago? All those promises that made you feel special, chosen. She looked down, her face burning, and for a moment I felt something unexpected, a twinge of pity. She was young and likely naive enough to think she was different, that he'd leave his life behind for her. I had been that woman once, believing in him and in the illusion of us. And here she was, a mirror to my younger self, already realizing the truth. Without thinking, I turned to my husband. So, was it worth it? I asked, my voice cutting through the uneasy silence. Was it worth risking everything? The family? The life we built? He didn't answer, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for words that, this time, would not come. The mighty, composed man I'd known stood broken, speechless. Finally, he muttered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." I felt a surge of rage and laughed, a cold, empty sound. Sorry? Is that all you have to say? Sorry for the lies, the betrayals, for dragging this girl into your web of deception, letting her think you'd ever be hers. Our children watched from the edge of the crowd, my daughter with tears in her eyes, my son in stunned disbelief. I softened my tone, glancing their way, and addressed them. Listen well. Love can lift you up, but deceit will tear it down. All the trust in the world won't save you if you won't cherish it. And with that, I placed my glass on the table, turned on my heel, and walked away from the only life I had ever known. As I walked away, the weight of it all pressed down on me. The years, the sacrifices, the quiet betrayals I had tolerated, all for the sake of a love I thought would endure. Each step away from him felt like shedding a layer of the past, peeling back the pretense I had wrapped myself in for so long. The guests parted like waves, their eyes downcast, whispering behind me, but I didn't look back. Once inside the house, I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest rising and falling as I fought to steady myself. The sound of muffled voices and clinking glasses carried through the walls. The party continued in my absence, a macabre reminder that life, even shattered, marches on. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in the empty stillness of our home, until I heard his footsteps approaching. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his face a mask of sorrow and regret. "Please," he began, his voice a broken whisper. "We don't have to end like this. We've been through so much together." I held his gaze, feeling both the ache of our shared years and the anger that now burned within me. Maybe we could have survived the distance, the arguments, even the disappointments. But this? I shook my head. This is a betrayal, too deep to ignore. He took a step closer, desperation flickering in his eyes. "I made a mistake," he said, voice trembling. "One mistake. But we can fix this. I can fix this. We're too old to start over, aren't we?" I felt a bitter smile creep across my face. "A mistake?" I echoed, my voice cold. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. This was a choice. Over and over you chose her. You chose to lie to me, to deceive everyone we love. That isn't a mistake. It's a pattern." He looked down, words failing him yet again. I could see him realizing, perhaps for the first time, the depth of his actions. I could see the fear, the loneliness that waited for him now, and for a brief moment, I almost pitied him. But pity was a fragile thing, easily snuffed out by the memory of every whispered conversation, every late night, every lie that had eroded the foundation of our marriage. He had chosen his path, and now he would walk it alone. I straightened, feeling a strange peace settle over me. "Goodbye," I said softly, finality in every syllable. Then I turned and walked upstairs, leaving him standing in the silence of our broken home, a man suddenly faced with the hollow consequences of his own choices. In the quiet sanctuary of our bedroom, I closed the door behind me, finally away from the tension, the eyes, the pity. The weight of the evening pressed down, as if the walls themselves bore witness to the secrets and lies that had festered within them. I looked around, at the photos on the dresser, the mementos of a life meticulously built. It all felt like someone else's life, someone else's love story. A faint knock interrupted my thoughts. "Please," he said from the other side, his voice barely a whisper. "Let me in. We can talk. Just you and me." I didn't answer. I knew there was nothing left to say. Words had held us together all these years, even in silence, even in pain. But tonight, words had finally failed us. I sank onto the edge of the bed, feeling the absurdity of it all. This bed, where we had shared countless moments, now felt as cold as stone. The knocking stopped, and I heard him slowly retreat down the hall. I was left alone with the strange, hollow quiet, broken only by the faint hum of voices from downstairs as guests murmured, still lingering in the wreckage of the evening. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled mindlessly through messages and photos. Pictures of vacations, holidays, smiles, ghosts of a life I had fiercely protected, only to discover it had never truly been mine. A message pinged on my screen, breaking my trance. It was from my daughter. "Mom, are you okay? Do you need me to come up?" I took a breath, blinking back tears. Am I okay? I wasn't sure. But for her, I had to be. "I'm fine," I typed back, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "I'll be down soon." I gathered myself, wiping away the stray tears, smoothing my dress as if to piece myself back together. I had decided, right then and there, that tonight would be the start of something new. I would not be defined by his betrayal, by his choices. I would be defined by what I chose now, in this moment, for myself. When I finally went back downstairs, the crowd had thinned. A few friends hovered nearby, hesitant, their eyes full of questions. My daughter rushed to my side, wrapping her arms around me, and I held her tightly, as if she were my anchor to something solid. I glanced across the room and saw him, standing alone, looking lost and small in the sea of his own making. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady, strong, and I knew that I would be all right. Not because of him, not because of anyone else, but because I had finally found the courage to leave behind the weight of a love that no longer held me. With one last look at the man I once thought would stand by me forever, I turned and walked out the door, stepping into the night and into the promise of a life I would now build on my own terms. The night air was cool and bracing as I stepped out, a stark contrast to the charged, claustrophobic atmosphere inside. I paused at the edge of the yard, letting the sounds of laughter and conversation drift away, leaving only the hum of crickets in the quiet suburban street. For the first time in years, I felt the pull of freedom, a life not tethered to expectations, not bound by his mistakes. A car door clicked open, and I turned to see my daughter approaching. She gave me a look, her eyes filled with a mix of worry and determination, and without a word, she gestured for me to get in. It struck me that tonight she was taking on the role of protector, and the thought brought both comfort and a pang of sorrow. We drove in silence, winding through familiar streets, each turn loosening the grip of the past. Finally, we pulled up to a small overlook, the city lights stretching out below us like scattered stars. She parked, and we sat there, each lost in our thoughts, the weight of what had happened still settling over us. After a while, she broke the silence. "Mom," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea. I thought you two were okay." I nodded, looking down at my hands. "I did too," I said, my voice thick. "Or maybe I just convinced myself we were. It was easier than facing the truth." I glanced over at her, catching the pain in her expression. "I'm sorry you had to see that, sweetheart. None of this was supposed to happen like this." She took my hand, squeezing it. "You don't have to apologize. If anything, I'm proud of you for finally standing up for yourself." She paused, swallowing hard. "What happens now?" It was a question I hadn't dared to ask myself, not until this moment. What did happen now? I turned, looking out over the city, as though the answer might be somewhere in the maze of lights below. For the first time in decades, I was without a roadmap. No plan, no carefully laid out path, just a blank slate and a future I had never imagined. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the honesty of it settle over me like a balm. "But I think that's okay. I've spent so long living for someone else. Maybe it's time to start living for me." She gave me a small, supportive smile, a tear glistening in her eye. "Then I'll be right here, whatever you decide." I leaned over, pulling her into a tight embrace, feeling the swell of gratitude and love that had carried me through this storm. In that moment, I knew that while my marriage might be over, my life was far from it, and with her by my side, I had everything I needed to face whatever came next. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting a soft, forgiving light over the city below, I felt something lift within me, a promise of new beginnings, of a journey not yet defined. And as the first light broke over the trees, I smiled, ready to meet whatever lay ahead. The early morning stretched before us, the city slowly coming alive as the first rays of sunlight painted everything in shades of soft gold and pink. I took a deep breath, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in years. My daughter sat beside me, her hand still in mine, the silence between us comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Eventually, she gave my hand one last squeeze. "Do you want to come back to my place?" she asked gently, breaking the stillness. "At least for a few days. Just to clear your head." I considered it, the thought of going back to that house weighing heavily on me. The house that had seen our children grow, that had been witness to every celebration, every quiet moment, and now every betrayal. Returning there felt like returning to the ruins of something that could never be repaired. "I'd like that," I answered, feeling a sense of relief at the decision. "Just a few days." As we drove to her apartment, I let myself think about the practicalities for the first time. The house, the financial entanglements, the logistics of ending a shared life. It all seemed overwhelming, but there was a strange calm in knowing it was inevitable. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to control every detail or map out every step. I simply let myself be, one moment at a time. When we arrived, she set me up in her cozy guest room, a small space with pale blue walls and a stack of my favorite novels on the nightstand. She had thought of everything, even placing a warm quilt at the foot of the bed. I smiled, touched by the care in every little detail. Days turned into a week. Each morning I woke to the sound of the city beyond her windows, a hum of possibility in the air. My daughter and I found a rhythm, quiet breakfasts together, afternoons where she'd go to work and I'd take long walks, letting the city's energy fill the hollow spaces within me. I rediscovered small joys, reading a novel undisturbed, wandering through bookstores, savoring a cup of tea by myself at a local cafe. There was a peace in the solitude, a solace in reclaiming the quiet. One evening, as we sat together over takeout, she broached the subject I knew was coming. "Mom," she began carefully, "have you thought about what you're going to do about Dad? About everything?" I set down my fork, feeling the weight of the question settle over me. I had avoided thinking too far ahead, letting myself heal in small ways, but I knew it couldn't wait forever. "Yes," I replied, steady but firm. "I'm going to ask him for a divorce." She nodded, and though sadness flickered in her eyes, I saw something else too. Pride. "You deserve better, Mom. You deserve to be happy, really happy." The words felt like a balm, and I nodded, more to myself than to her. I think I'm finally ready to find out what that looks like." The next morning, I packed a small bag and returned to the house. It was eerily quiet, the rooms filled with a heavy stillness, as if they too were mourning the end. I found him in the kitchen, his back to me, nursing a cup of coffee. He turned as I entered, surprise flashing across his face, then something softer, almost resigned. We stood there for a long moment, words hanging unspoken between us. Finally, I broke the silence. "I'm here to talk about what comes next." He nodded, setting down his cup, his gaze dropping. I suppose I always knew this day would come. I took a steadying breath, choosing my words carefully. "We've both made mistakes, but I can't ignore what happened, or go on pretending that things could ever be the same." He looked up, his face drawn, his eyes weary. "I understand," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I broke something I can't repair." There was nothing more to say. We agreed on the basics, the mechanics of dividing a life, the end of us. It felt surreal, talking about the end with such calm, but perhaps we were both too tired for anything else. As I left, stepping through the doorway one last time, I realized that the ache was gone, replaced by something gentler, a sense of release, a quiet acceptance. The love we had shared, the memories we'd built, they would always be a part of me. But now, they were just that, memories, fragments of a life I had outgrown. I walked away from that house with my head held high, stepping fully into the unknown, and as I felt the sun warm my face, I knew that I was finally free, ready to embrace the life that lay ahead, undefined and waiting. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of changes, but I navigated each one with a newfound clarity. Divorce papers were signed, accounts were separated, the house was placed on the market. Each step, once daunting, now felt like shedding another layer of the life that no longer fit. I wasn't just closing a chapter, I was stepping into a new book entirely, one in which I alone held the pen. My daughter and I continued our quiet routine, and the rhythms of her life became a comfort, a reminder that I was rebuilding something steady and true. With her by my side, I began to imagine a future, a life lived just for me, untethered from the past. One evening, after a long day of sorting and packing, we sat together on her small balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. She poured us both a glass of wine and held hers up in a silent toast, a smile lighting her face. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice soft, filled with hope. I clinked my glass to hers, feeling the words settle deep within me. To new beginnings. As the months unfolded, I took steps that I'd only ever dreamed of. Traveling, enrolling in art classes, filling my days with books and music, reconnecting with old friends. I was learning what it meant to be whole on my own, to listen to my own needs, my own desires. And there, in the quiet of each new dawn, I found a peace I had long thought impossible. The betrayal, the heartbreak, all that I had endured faded into something small, distant, like a storm that had finally passed. The scars remained, reminders of lessons learned, but they no longer held power over me. I was more than the pain, more than the person I had been. I was stronger, unbreakable, and free. Years from now, I'd look back on this time, not with regret, but with gratitude for the freedom that had been born from my own resilience. Life, I realized, is never truly perfect, but it is endlessly capable of renewal. And as I stood watching the sun rise over my own life's uncharted path, I felt ready, knowing that this time, every step I took would be one of my own choosing. This was my life now, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. Just me, in all my strength, finally at peace with the woman I had become.